Hey folks, welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about The Thousand Names by Django Wexler, which is an intro to what promises to be a really fun fantasy quintet, I guess, because this is 5 books. A really fun fantasy series. So, this is military fantasy with a lot of heart, a lot of action, and a lot of promise. So, what is The Thousand Names about? Captain Marcus Devore. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, to be honest. Let's go with Devore. Captain Marcus Devore is in charge of one of the colonial garrisons for the Vortenai Empire when fierce and furious rebellion breaks out. To complicate matters, a new colonel is arriving to take charge of the garrison. But this is a colonel with a mysterious agenda of his own, and the survival of the garrison isn't necessarily high up on the agenda. Aside from that, we have Winter Airglass, who flees the girl's home where she was essentially a ward of the state, and she signs up to the army pretending to be a man. But as the fighting breaks out and becomes even more fierce, being exposed as a woman in the army, which is illegal, is starting to look like the best case scenario for her. So, right off the bat, we have a story that's pretty much just action adventure of the military fantasy variety. In particular, Flintlock. Like, if you're a Flintlock fan, these books are for you. There's it's just ram packed with a lot of action sequences that are very much focused on Flintlock technology, and that's one thing Django Wexler is really good at writing, just really entertaining battle scenes. So, in that regard alone, if nothing else, this book delivers. Django Wexler's writing in general is very straightforward to the point. He doesn't have very flowery prose. He doesn't have many creative or fascinating turns of phrases or that kind of thing. It does the job, and it does it well. It's more than good enough to write a fast-paced, action-packed, interesting, and fun story, which is what you get with this. There's not exactly a lot of depth to be plumbed in terms of the writing style. It's as plain Jane as you come, and that's fine. So there's that. Let's get to the characters now. Now, funnily enough, the book kind of sets up Marcus to be like the main character, whatever. But for me, he was by far the most boring person to read about in here. Like, Marcus doesn't. He has this whole noble chivalrous kind of attitude, and his storyline was mainly comprised of situations surrounding a love interest. They learning to figure out to work with this new commander, whilst addressing his doubts and figuring out figuring out a way out of this situation. In addition to that, dealing with complicated situations surrounding another officer in the army. Not really compelling stuff, to be honest. By far, the most interesting, the most engaging, the most entertaining part of this book is Winter's sections. Like, she goes through quite a bit. She's a grunt on the ground, so in many ways she's in the thick of the fighting. Her story is just fraught with tension because she has this whole undercurrent of being an illegal gender in the army, and dealing with all the situations surrounding that. And as the story progresses and she slowly begins to form bonds with the soldiers that she has to interact with, it really changes her in a very interesting way. She was just far more interesting to read about than Marcus. But what else can I say about it? It's as simple as that. Like, Marcus was not interesting to read about compared to Winter, but somehow the book as a whole works. So I'm fine with that. Because this isn't exactly a book that bothers to go super deep into characters and all of that. Like, you're here for the action, you're here for the entertainment value of it, and on that front, Django Wexler delivers. Interestingly enough, in terms of the way that the that the story begins to unfold, he takes his time. Like, this book starts off as a slow burn. We get an introduction to the world, we get an introduction to the scenario, and this kind of thing. We get an introduction to the main characters. He takes his time and set the stage and put the pieces in place. And then when the action starts, things really escalate and get really fun really fast. It pays off. It's an investment in time that really pays off. So once you make it past that initial slow start, you're off to the races. And when I say slow, I don't mean that it drags or it's boring or that kind of thing. It's just a bit of a slow burn to start off. Once the stage is set, he does a good job of hooking you and keeping you engaged in a pretty relentless story from there, from start to finish. One cool thing I did want to touch on that was included here, that I'm actually happy was included here, is that this is very much a situation of a conquering army having a colonial outpost. And what we have is a clash of cultures of societies. And Django doesn't sweep that under the brush and pretend that everything is fine and dandy, everyone is equal, all of that. Like, it's very much a scenario where you have a conquering force similar to, if I had to compare them to a real war force, I would think like the British. And if I had to think of comparison for where the colony is and that particular situation, I would think something Middle Eastern. And you very much have, as is very real world in that kind of scenario, you very much have a situation where there's elements of racism, imperialism, just superiority complexes and disdain for the local culture and these kinds of things that are just threaded throughout the story in the way that the Vardanai view the locals. So it adds an element of realism to the story, for me, and I'm glad it's something that he chose to address. Like, this book could very much read like a historical event, because even the magic that's included in here is very light. It has more of it doesn't play much part of the story to begin initially. Like, this could read very much like historical fiction with a slight a slight dash of fantasy, in that aside from it happening in a shared world, this could very well have happened in our world a couple of 100 years ago. So there's that. Yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about The Thousand Names, to be honest. It was an entertaining book, a very promising start. I don't care much for the guy who's being set up as the main character, but one thing that was really cool about the series is that it felt kind of like the time was, like, the majority of the story is split equally between him and a much more fascinating character to me. So it's not like his parts, are slow or boring, or I dislike reading them or anything like that. I just didn't care about what was going on with him very much. Like, I read his parts and I was like, okay, let's keep going, whatever. So all in all, I would summarize this as a promising start to what promises to be a pretty fun series. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about this book. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.